The autumn of 1984 clung to Salem, Massachusetts, with a familiar, damp chill. The crisp air, tinged with the scent of decaying leaves and the distant tang of the Atlantic, settled over the historic town like a well-worn shroud. For Eleanor Vance, a 29-year-old registered nurse at Salem Hospital, these were the seasons of quiet routine. Her days unfolded with a methodical rhythm, each hour meticulously charted, much like the patients she cared for. Eleanor lived in a modest, third-floor apartment on Federal Street, a quiet stretch lined with stately Federalist homes and towering elms. Her building, a charmingly aged brick structure, offered a sliver of peace after the demanding shifts in the emergency room. Mornings began before dawn, a hurried coffee and a glance at the Salem Evening News, then a short drive up Highland Avenue to the hospital. She was known for her calm demeanor, her steady hands, and an almost preternatural empathy that endeared her to colleagues and patients alike. Her uniform, crisp and white, was a stark contrast to the subdued colors of her private world. But beneath the surface of this composed exterior, a tremor of unease had begun to ripple. Eleanor, while outwardly reserved, harbored a secret that had grown heavy, pressing down on her spirit. She was entangled in an affair with Arthur Sterling, a man a decade her senior, a pillar of the Salem community. Sterling owned a successful chain of hardware stores, his name synonymous with local philanthropy and influence. To the public, he was a devoted husband and father. To Eleanor, he was a complicated vortex of charm and possessiveness, a man she had once been drawn to, but now desperately wished to escape. Their rendezvous were furtive, clandestine meetings held in dimly lit corners of forgotten taverns outside of town, or in a decrepit, rented cottage on the outskirts of Beverly. The thrill had long since curdled into fear. She had told her closest friend, Brenda, another nurse, that she was planning to end things, to leave Salem entirely and seek a fresh start somewhere far away, perhaps Boston or even New York. Brenda remembered the tremor in Eleanor's voice, the way her eyes darted nervously, a flicker of genuine terror she hadn't understood then. The last week of October, leading up to Halloween, usually brought a festive, if macabre, energy to Salem. Tourists flocked to the historical sites and the town buzzed with costumed revelers. But for Eleanor, the atmosphere felt oppressive. She was increasingly agitated, jumpy, her usual calm replaced by a brittle anxiety. On October 27th, a Tuesday, Eleanor worked a double shift, covering for a sick colleague. It was a chaotic evening in the ER, a minor car pileup on Route 128, a few Halloween-related mishaps. She left the hospital at precisely 11:17 p.m., as confirmed by the security guard's log. Colleagues remembered her saying goodnight, a weary smile, but nothing unusual. She was supposed to meet her sister, Sarah, for breakfast the next morning at the Lyceum Bar and Grill downtown, a weekly tradition they cherished. Sarah, waiting patiently at their usual booth by the window, ordered an extra coffee. An hour passed, then two. Eleanor, meticulously punctual, was unheard of. By noon, Sarah's worry had hardened into a cold dread. She called Eleanor's apartment, no answer. She called the hospital. Eleanor had clocked out as scheduled. Sarah then drove to Federal Street, knocking repeatedly on the apartment door, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. Silence. Sarah called their parents, Martha and Robert Vance, who lived in Peabody. Robert, a retired electrician, immediately drove to Salem. He found Eleanor's Ford Fairmont, a sensible four-door sedan, parked near Pickering Wharf, a spot she occasionally used for walks. The car was locked, pristine, nothing amiss, but Eleanor was gone. Her purse, containing her wallet and keys, was not inside. It was as if she had simply vanished into the salty night air. The Salem Police Department was notified that afternoon. Detective Sergeant Frank Miller, a seasoned veteran with 22 years on the force, was assigned the case. Miller was a man forged from the gritty streets of working-class Lynn, pragmatic and meticulous. He arrived at Eleanor's apartment with a small team. No signs of forced entry. Her bed was neatly made, her toiletries were in their usual place. The refrigerator contained fresh groceries. It was as if she'd simply stepped out for a moment and never returned. There was no note, no indication of a planned departure, no signs of struggle or foul play. It was an absence, absolute and chilling. Miller's initial investigation moved swiftly. He interviewed Eleanor's neighbors, her colleagues at Salem Hospital, and her distraught family. Brenda, Eleanor's friend, cautiously mentioned Arthur Sterling, her voice hushed, the words barely a whisper. She explained Eleanor's fear, her desire to break free. Miller, sensing the gravity of the information, assured Brenda her words were crucial. Sterling was brought in for questioning. he presented a calm, unflappable front, his alibi ironclad. He had been home with his wife the entire evening. He admitted knowing Eleanor professionally. As a client of his hardware stores, the hospital often bought supplies from him, but vehemently denied any romantic involvement. Without further evidence, Miller had to let him go. The public profile of Sterling meant any accusation needed solid proof. Searches were organized. Volunteers from the community, alongside police officers, combed the parks, the waterfront, the dense woods around Forest River Park. Dog teams were brought in. Flyers with Eleanor's kind, earnest face were plastered on lampposts, in storefronts, on bulletin boards across Salem and its neighboring towns, Beverly, Peabody, Marblehead. The local news channels picked up the story, then the Boston affiliates. The mystery of the missing nurse gripped the community, a dark cloud settling over the historic town. But days turned into weeks, weeks into months, and Eleanor Vance remained gone. The initial fervor of the investigation slowly, inexorably, began to wane. Detective Miller felt the familiar, frustrating drag of a case going cold. The Salem Police Department, though dedicated, was not equipped with the advanced forensic tools that would become commonplace decades later. Fingerprint analysis was rudimentary, DNA profiling a nascent science largely confined to research labs, not routine police work. Without a body, without a crime scene, without any tangible physical evidence, Miller's team was navigating a labyrinth blindfolded. Every light, every faint whisper of information led to a dead end. Eleanor's car, found by Pickering Wharf, yielded no clues beyond her fingerprints, her own, as expected. The interior was undisturbed, no stray hairs, no fibers, no trace of an unfamiliar presence. It was unsettling in its very emptiness, suggesting a disappearance that was either meticulously planned or executed with chilling precision. Miller revisited the hospital, re-interviewed every staff member who had worked that night. He walked the path Eleanor might have taken from her parking spot to her apartment, trying to reconstruct her final known movements, but the autumn nights were long and dark, and witnesses were scarce. The few who remembered seeing a woman matching Eleanor's description near the wharf that night provided vague details, mostly focused on the chill in the air or the dim streetlights. For Martha and Robert Vance, Eleanor's parents, the waiting was an unbearable torture. Their lives, once stable and predictable, had been shattered into a million sharp fragments. Martha, usually a vibrant and social woman, retreated into a shell of grief. Her days were spent staring out the window, every passing car a potential bearer of news, every ringing phone a jolt of desperate hope quickly extinguished. Robert, the stoic provider, found himself walking the streets of Salem aimlessly, posting and reposting faded flyers, his voice hoarse from asking the same questions to indifferent strangers. Their younger daughter, Sarah, struggled to reconcile the memory of her vivacious sister with the spectral image that haunted her dreams. The weekly breakfasts at the Lyceum became a painful reminder of a void that could never be filled. The family hired a private investigator, a former state trooper named Jack O'Malley, but even his experience couldn't conjure lights where none seemed to exist. O'Malley confirmed Miller's assessment. Arthur Sterling, despite Brenda's suspicions, had successfully insulated himself. His alibi held, and his reputation in town was a formidable shield. The local newspapers, initially ablaze with headlines about the missing nurse of Salem, gradually relegated Eleanor's story to smaller, then forgotten corners. The public's attention, fickle and easily swayed, moved on to other dramas, other tragedies. Yet, for those who knew Eleanor, the wound festered. Halloween in Salem, a time of festive frights, now carried a real, unspoken dread. The historic lore of witches and vanished women took on a darker, more personal resonance for the Vance family, though they vehemently rejected any supernatural explanations. This was a human tragedy, a cruel act of flesh and blood, and it deserved a human answer. Detective Miller never truly let go. Eleanor Vance's file, thick with fruitless reports and dead-end tips, occupied a permanent spot on his office shelf, a silent reproach. Over the years, he would periodically pull it down, leaf through the faded photographs, reread the interviews, searching for a missed detail, a forgotten nuance. He retired in 1994, 2 years before anything surfaced, but the case of Eleanor Vance remained the one gnawing regret of his distinguished career. He often thought of the Vance family, the way their hope had slowly been leached away, replaced by an enduring, quiet despair. Salem, a town so proud of its history, now carried an unspoken burden, the unresolved disappearance of one of its own. The mystery had become a part of the town's fabric, another ghost among the many, but this one was all too real, all too recent. 12 years blurred into memory, a relentless march of seasons that did little to heal the raw wounds of loss. It was now 1996. The internet was a nascent novelty, cellular phones clunky and rare, and the world had moved on, albeit subtly. For Martha and Robert Vance, however, time had stood still, a perpetual October day. Sarah, Eleanor's younger sister, was now a mother herself, raising her 2 children in Marblehead, but the shadow of her sister's disappearance never truly lifted. Every birthday, every holiday, was tinged with Eleanor's absence. The summer of '96 was unusually hot, the humid air clinging to Salem's brick facades. On Bridge Street, a grand but long-neglected Victorian mansion stood as a testament to faded glory. It had belonged to an elderly woman, Beatrice Abernathy, a reclusive spinster who had passed away quietly in her sleep a few months prior at the age of 92. Her distant nephew, inheriting the property, had decided to sell it. The house, untouched for decades, was a time capsule of dust-shrouded furniture and forgotten memories. Before listing it, he hired a local construction company, Salem Renovations, to undertake a full interior demolition and renovation, preparing the dilapidated structure for a modern buyer. On a sweltering Tuesday in late July, a crew of 3 men, led by foreman Marco Ramirez, was systematically dismantling the ornate fireplace in the mansion's front parlor. The mantelpiece, a heavy dark oak structure carved with intricate grapevines, was proving stubborn. As Marco applied leverage with a crowbar, a section of the plasterboard behind the mantel gave way with a soft crack, revealing not brick, but a small, dark recess. Dust motes danced in the shaft of light that pierced the gloom. "Hold on," Marco called to his team, his voice echoing in the empty room. He peered closer. Wedged tightly within the hidden compartment, almost perfectly concealed, was a small wooden box. It was a simple, unadorned box made of pine with a brass clasp now tarnished green. It looked old, weathered, as if it had been there for a very long time. Marco carefully extracted it. It was surprisingly heavy. Curiosity piqued, the men gathered around. Marco undid the clasp. Inside, nestled on a bed of yellowed silk, were several items. The first was a small, leather-bound diary, its pages brittle with age, secured with a thin, faded ribbon. Beside it lay a small, tarnished silver locket, engraved with the initial E. A few folded letters, their envelopes unsealed and brittle, completed the contents. The air in the room suddenly felt colder, despite the summer heat. This was not the usual discarded junk they found during demolitions. This was personal. This was someone's secret. Marco, with a sense of gravity, called the police. Not the general line, but the non-emergency one, explaining he had found something peculiar. Within an hour, a patrol car arrived, followed shortly by a detective from the Salem PD, Detective Jenkins, a younger officer who was unfamiliar with the nuances of old cold cases. Jenkins, seeing the worn diary and the locket, quickly recognized the potential significance. He made another call. Soon, a familiar, slightly hunched figure arrived. Frank Miller, though retired, was still deeply respected within the department. He had been a consultant on a few cold cases, his encyclopedic memory and methodical approach still invaluable. Jenkins had called him precisely because the description, a hidden box, a locket with E, a diary, had instantly triggered a memory from the department's ancient archives, the Eleanor Vance case. Miller stepped into the dusty parlor, the smell of old wood and plaster filling his nostrils. His gaze fell upon the wooden box on the workbench. He picked up the locket, his thumb tracing the faint E. A wave of professional duty, mixed with a deeply personal sense of vindication, washed over him. "Eleanor Vance," he murmured, his voice thick with the weight of years. The diary was carefully handed over to a forensic team, but the fragility of the paper made them cautious. Under controlled conditions, the first page was gently opened. The neat, looping script of Eleanor Vance filled the page, dated September 1st, 1984. The first entries were mundane, observations about her nursing shifts, reflections on a new book. But then, the tone shifted. The handwriting grew tighter, the words infused with an undercurrent of fear and desperation. The entries revealed the full, agonizing truth of Eleanor's secret life. She wrote of her affair with Arthur Sterling, detailing its clandestine nature, his initial charm, and his slow descent into controlling possessiveness. She described his explosive temper, the chilling verbal threats, the subtle intimidation that had chipped away at her resolve. She wrote of her growing terror, her plan to leave Salem, to sever all ties. She documented their arguments, the emotional manipulation, the insidious way he had isolated her from some of her friends, fearing exposure. A particularly chilling entry, dated October 25, 1984, just 2 days before her disappearance, read, "Arthur knows I'm trying to leave. He followed me last night, said if I ever tell anyone he'll make sure I disappear. He said it with a smile, but his eyes were ice. I'm so scared. We're meeting at Beatrice's house again on the 27th, late," he insisted. "He said we need to talk things through. I have a terrible feeling. I've hidden this just in case. If anything happens, if I don't come back, please, someone find this. Find Arthur. He's capable of anything." The significance of the location hit Miller like a physical blow. Beatrice Abernathy, the old recluse who owned this very house, was Arthur Sterling's aunt, a distant, often forgotten relative, but a connection nonetheless. Eleanor must have known this, used it as a seemingly safe, anonymous meeting place, or perhaps Sterling himself had suggested it, knowing his aunt was rarely home or too infirm to notice. The house on Bridge Street, undergoing its facelift, was not just a random location. It was the chilling scene of Eleanor's final, desperate act of self-preservation, a silent cry for help buried for a decade. The letters, too, were from Eleanor, addressed to her sister Sarah, unsent, detailing her fears in a more direct, urgent tone, confirming the diary's narrative. The old file, once cold and inert, was now ablaze with new, undeniable evidence. The case of Eleanor Vance was no longer a mystery, but a tragedy waiting for its final, horrific act to be revealed. Detective Miller, despite his retirement, found himself thrust back into the heart of the investigation, a personal mission reignited. Arthur Sterling's carefully constructed life, 12 years after Eleanor's vanishing, was about to unravel. The unearthing of Eleanor Vance's diary and letters sent shockwaves through the Salem Police Department and the community. The old headlines were dusted off, new ones screamed across the front pages. Eleanor Vance diary found, cold case reignited. Detective Jenkins, now working under the unofficial guidance of a re-energized Frank Miller, led the revived investigation. The first and most crucial step was to bring Arthur Sterling back in. Sterling, now 52, a decade older but still impeccably dressed and outwardly composed, was a man whose influence had only grown. He owned 4 hardware stores, sat on several city boards, and was a prominent figure in local charities. His initial reaction to the police summons was one of thinly veiled annoyance, a dismissive wave of the hand at what he perceived as a nuisance. But the moment Detective Jenkins, with Miller observing silently from a corner, laid the small, leather-bound diary on the table, its pages open to Eleanor's chilling final entry, Sterling's composure cracked. His face, usually a mask of geniality, paled. His eyes, once so dismissive, darted between the diary and the 2 detectives. "What is this?" he stammered, his voice losing its usual smooth timbre. Miller, stepping forward, his voice a gravelly whisper honed by decades of interrogation, cut through Sterling's pretense. "It's Eleanor Vance's diary, Mr. Sterling, found hidden in your aunt's old house on Bridge Street. The house where she last wrote she was meeting you, the house where she feared for her life." Sterling tried to bluster, to deny, to accuse the police of harassment, but the diary's meticulous entries, detailing dates, times, specific conversations, and his own controlling behavior, were irrefutable. The unsent letters to Sarah confirmed the narrative, painting a consistent, horrifying picture. The weight of 12 years of silence, the carefully constructed facade of a respected citizen, began to crumble under the relentless pressure of cold, hard evidence. His initial alibi, once seemingly solid, was now exposed as a carefully woven fabrication, a network of lies that depended on the trust of his wife and the lack of any conflicting information. With the diary, police re-interviewed Sterling's wife, who, under mounting pressure, tearfully admitted that Arthur had been absent from their home for a significant portion of the evening of October 27, 1984, claiming a late business meeting, an excuse she had doubted even then. The forensic team, despite the passage of time, found a faint, almost microscopic trace of Eleanor's blood on a loose floorboard in the hidden compartment where the diary was found, a testament to a hurried, desperate attempt to hide her message. They also located what appeared to be tiny fragments of fabric matching the type of uniform Eleanor would have worn. It wasn't conclusive evidence of murder at that exact spot, but it reinforced the timeline and the urgency of her hidden message. It was enough, coupled with Sterling's increasingly erratic behavior during questioning, his shifting stories, and the overwhelming emotional impact of Eleanor's own words, the district attorney moved swiftly. Arthur Sterling was arrested and charged with the murder of Eleanor Vance. The arrest made national news. For Martha and Robert Vance, the news was a maelstrom of conflicting emotions. Relief, bitter and long delayed, mingled with an aching grief for the daughter they would never see again. Sarah, now a seasoned woman, felt a surge of validation mixed with profound sadness. Eleanor had been right to be afraid. Her sister's ghost, which had haunted her for so long, had finally spoken. The trial of Arthur Sterling became the most talked-about event in Salem in decades. The prosecution, building its case primarily on Eleanor's diary and the newly discovered corroborating evidence, painted a vivid, chilling portrait of a possessive man driven to violence to protect his reputation. Sterling's defense attempted to discredit the diary as unreliable, the product of a troubled mind, but the consistency of the narrative, the specific details that only Eleanor could have known, and the corroborating testimony from Brenda, who now understood the true depth of Eleanor's fear and Sterling's own wife, proved insurmountable. After a tense, emotional trial that lasted weeks, Arthur Sterling was found guilty of murder. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Justice, in a grim and belated form, had finally been served. But the victory was hollow for the Vance family. Eleanor's body was never found, despite exhaustive searches prompted by Sterling's eventual grudging confessions, which often contradicted each other, painting a picture of a man still trying to control the narrative, even behind bars. No trace of her remains ever surfaced. He admitted to disposing of her body in a remote, heavily wooded area near the Ipswich River, but the exact location remained elusive, swallowed by time and nature. The silence of her final resting place echoed the enduring mystery of her disappearance. For Martha and Robert, and for Sarah, the closure was incomplete. They knew who had taken Eleanor and why, but they could never lay her to rest. The image of their daughter, frozen in time at 29, haunted them still. The autumn winds continued to blow through Salem, carrying the scent of salt and turning leaves, but now, when the leaves fell, they carried with them the heavy memory of Eleanor Vance, a nurse who disappeared, leaving behind only her words, her fear, and an enduring, heartbreaking void. The discovery had brought justice, but it had not and could never bring Eleanor home. The shadows of what happened on that crisp October night in 1984 would forever linger over the historic streets of Salem, a testament to a life taken too soon, and a mystery that, despite its partial resolution, would forever bear the heavy mark of unanswered questions.